Good evening, welcome, and please do carry on with your food and drink, but I'll just get started in case anyone needs to get away by a certain time. And we come to our last talk on St. Mary Magdalene, and so we can start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. And it's very nice to see some new faces here. And for the new faces, the idea of these talks is to think about different saints and how they help us love Jesus, and especially love him in the Eucharist. And so we come to St. Mary Magdalene tonight. And we don't know a huge amount about her, but there are some beautiful passages in the Gospel that show her relationship with Jesus. And so I thought of three ideas with a few different texts. That she keeps close to Jesus. She teaches us to keep close to Jesus. She hears Jesus call her by her name. And then Jesus calls her to go on mission, gives her a mission. And I'll just start with this first text, which is the first mention we have of her in the Gospels. It's in Luke chapter 8. Soon afterwards, he, Jesus, went on through cities and villages, preaching and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. And the 12 were with him, and also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their means. So Mary Magdalene is one of this group of holy women who followed Jesus. But the first clue we have about her, apart from her name, which means she came from Magdala, which is a pagan town in the Galilee region, near where Jesus was from. Apart from her name, we have this detail: from whom 7 demons had gone out. That Jesus had cleansed her of 7 demons. And we don't really know much about that. We just know that fact. And in the tradition of the church, some people have identified Mary Magdalene with another woman in Luke's Gospel, the one who comes to the house of Simon the Pharisee, and she's known as a public sinner. And she washes the feet of Jesus at this dinner, and Simon the Pharisee isn't happy about that. Well, we don't know if that's the same person, although often people make that connection. But we can perhaps think about, what were those 7 demons about? And it struck me that there's another text where Jesus talks about 7 demons, which might give us a clue. Jesus says this in Matthew's Gospel: "When the unclean spirit has gone out of a man, he passes through waterless places, seeking rest, but he finds none. Then he says, 'I will return to my house from which I came.' And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and brings with him 7 other evil spirits, more evil than himself." So Jesus is talking about a demon that goes out of someone, but then he comes back and he brings 7 other demons because he finds that person empty, swept, and put in order. And this number 7, for the Jews, it was a number of completeness. So we don't have to maybe take it absolutely literally, but at least that helped me think about what might be at the root of Mary's problem, or the root of all of our problems when we're without Jesus. Sometimes we think the big problem is what we do. The big problem is because we've done bad things, and perhaps we have. But this story is quite striking, because the demon comes back with his 7 fellow demons because he finds the person empty. It doesn't say because he's found the person has done this or done that or done the other, but he finds the person empty. Swept and put in order, but empty. And I think that's at the heart of all of our separation from God. When we're empty, when we haven't let Jesus in, or we've tried to put something else in our hearts, something that won't really satisfy us, and we know it won't really satisfy us, but for whatever reason we put it there. And so if we're empty of Jesus, that's when the 7 demons come in. And perhaps that was what happened to Mary Magdalene with her 7 demons. That there was a certain emptiness there that she needed Jesus to fill, that she needed to be closer to Jesus. And we don't know how he healed her of that, how he drove out those demons, but we know he did it. And we see how her life is transformed after that moment. From being empty, perhaps, she's now so close to Jesus in everything he does. She spent her whole life with Jesus, not looking for anything else to make her happy. Because we hear that she, with these other holy women, followed him around in his public ministry, provided for him out of their own means. So she, really put her money where her mouth was. She followed Jesus and provided for him, that she kept so close to him. And there's another line in St. Paul where he says, "Do not give a place to the devil. Do not give a space to the devil in your heart. Do not be empty, but be filled with Jesus." And we see how after Mary's healed, she keeps so close to Jesus throughout his whole life. And she's faithful unto the cross. She's one of those holy women standing by the cross. She's close to him even then, when all of the male disciples have run away apart from John. Mary is there. And she's not hysterical there. We just had the Stations of the Cross, and we see the daughters of Jerusalem, the women of Jerusalem, they're weeping. Almost too much. And Jesus says, "Don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves." But the women of Jerusalem aren't like the women of Galilee, like Mary Magdalene. We hear that they're standing by the cross. They're not collapsing, they're standing by the cross. And so Mary is faithful. She keeps close to Jesus, even at the cross. And perhaps when she saw him being stripped, took his garments from him, perhaps she'd paid for those garments. Perhaps she'd helped to weave them. She was helping him out of her own means throughout his whole public ministry. So she keeps close to him on the cross. And even in his burial. This is the next passage. "It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices which they had prepared." And so they're faithfully close to him at the cross, but even in his tomb, they go to see how he's been buried. And as soon as they can, they come back to anoint him again. They want to keep close to Jesus. And we see an abundance of their affection and care. In John's Gospel we hear that when Jesus was buried, Joseph of Arimathea had 100 pounds weight of aloes and myrrh and the spices used by the Jews. You know, those big sugar bags you get in Sainsbury's, 45 of those sugar bags, 45 kilos. That's how much they used when Jesus was buried. But Mary Magdalene's there, and she sees him being buried with this huge amount of beautiful materials and spices, but she wants to do more. And so she goes and prepares more spices and more ointments, and then she comes back as soon as she can the next morning to anoint him even more. So with this complete abundance of love for the body of Jesus. And it might remind us of that other Mary in the Gospels, Lazarus' sister, Martha's sister, who breaks open the nard, the precious nard, and washes Jesus' feet just before his passion. And people think it's a waste. Judas says it's a waste of money. But no, Mary Magdalene, like that other Mary, she wants to give so much to the Jesus, to lavish affection and love on him. And some of the saints have seen in this Mary and the other that we can never do enough for the body of Jesus. We can never do enough for the Blessed Sacrament. And so that's a beautiful image of keeping close to Jesus in that way. So Mary Magdalene, she keeps close to Jesus, but she doesn't always have great faith in him. She has great longing for him, great desire to be with him, even in the tomb, but she doesn't really have great faith in him. She's faithful to the cross, but she's not faithful to what he said about rising again. She doesn't believe it. She loves him and she wants to be with him, but she doesn't quite believe that he's really going to rise again. We see in John's Gospel that she comes to the tomb early in the morning and she finds it empty. And I'll just read the first part of that next passage. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "Because they've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Saying this, she turned round and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. So Mary has heard so many times, so she's been travelling around with Jesus, and Jesus has been saying so many times that he's going to die and rise again. And she's longing to be with him. She comes to the tomb on the early morning, and the tomb is empty. And so what does she think? She thinks the worst. She thinks someone's taken the body away. She's completely forgotten about what Jesus has said so many times. She sees the empty tomb and she thinks the worst possible outcome, that someone has come and stolen the body. And she doesn't really recognize the people she sees in the tomb, those two angels. It's as if she's speaking to normal people. And then even Jesus comes and she thinks he's the gardener. And perhaps part of this is because of the tears in her eyes. She's weeping. She can't see properly. And certainly she can't see with her heart, because her heart is lacking faith. She's got a lot of love, a lot of affection, but very little faith. She thinks the worst, and so she doesn't recognise what's really happened. And we can understand why. I mean, it's one thing to hear about Jesus suffering, but it's another thing to see it. It's another thing to stand by the cross and see it. It's one thing to hear about the fact that as followers of Christ we must suffer. We've heard that so many times. It's one thing to hear it, it's another thing to actually experience it, and how it can really challenge us. It can really hit us. And so Mary is in that situation. She's heard it so many times, but when it comes to it, she's forgotten the most important things. But her desire for Jesus, her desire to keep close to him, lets him bring her to faith. That all she's got is her love, her affection. And through that, Jesus brings her to faith. He lifts her up to faith because of that desire she has to be close to him. I'll just carry on the passage. Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. I'll just stop there. So Mary, she's not even looking at Jesus. She's not even looking at this gardener. She's crying. She's not looking for a way forward. But she's there. And she's listening. And Jesus says, "Mary." He calls her by her name. And it says, first of all, that she turned. She turns. She's realised who it is now. She's been called by her name, and she turns to Jesus. And then she says this to him, Rabboni, which means teacher. And actually it means a bit more than teacher. It means my teacher. Jesus is called Rabbi in this gospel many times by different people. But this word is only used here. It's only used by Mary here. It's not just teacher, it's my teacher. That Jesus calls her by her name, and then Mary gives him his own personal name for her, my teacher. And John, he doesn't just write teacher or my teacher, he writes it with the very word that Mary used in Hebrew, Rabboni, as if to say, this word's really important. You know, this is a beautiful word because of what it meant for Mary at that moment. And so he wants to record it exactly as it is. Perhaps there's some phrases and names we remember very clearly being called. Maybe some family names or whatever it is. But this is like that. It's one of those names that's so important that Luke has to put it exactly as she said it, Rabboni. And so Mary hears her name being called personally, and so she responds personally, my teacher. Because now she understands the lesson. Now she understands what Jesus has been trying to teach her, that he will rise again. And how often we need to be reminded of that. How often we need that truth to be applied or to make sense to us personally. Because again, we hear it so often. We hear about the suffering we need to endure as Christians so often, but then when we experience it personally, it can really strike us. But so too, as well as hearing about the resurrection so often, we can let that strike us personally. Perhaps in those very moments of our lives when we feel that suffering, when we feel that separation from God, feel that emptiness, that's when Jesus can strike our hearts with that personal message that he's risen. He's risen in my life. He's risen in your life. And he wants to bring us to life, even in those areas where we think it's all dead and we're weeping. He comes and he calls us by name, Mary. And we're called to turn to him and to respond as well, my teacher. You are teaching me that you are risen in my life. And Mary then wants to embrace him. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and said to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. Again, Mary just wants to be close to Jesus. Even when she thought he was dead, never to rise, she wanted to be close to him. But now, even more that he's alive, she wants to be close to him. She tries to cling to him, to embrace him. But he says to her, "Do not hold me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." And what a strange thing to say. "Do not hold me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." It's as if he's saying, because once I have ascended to the Father, then you can hold me. But how, Lord Jesus? How, when you've gone so far away, how can I hold you then? How can I cling to you then, when you've ascended to your Father? And I wonder what Mary thought about these words, what she was thinking about these words. And I wonder if a few days later, or however long it was later, when she gathered with the other disciples and they celebrated the Eucharist and she received Holy Communion, I wonder what those words meant to her then. Because that is the amazing way that Jesus lets us hold him after he's ascended to his Father. Jesus lets us cling to him personally after he's ascended to his Father through Holy Communion. If he'd stayed among us, we could never get anywhere near him. I mean, even the most sort of B-list celebrity, it's hard to get anywhere near them. And imagine if Jesus had stayed with us. But he wants so much to be with each one of us, for each one of us to hold him, each one of us to cling to him and embrace him, that he's found a way to do it, the most amazing way, through Holy Communion. "Do not hold me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." And so Mary is a beautiful example of not only how to listen to Jesus speaking our name, but also how to embrace him. And we can do the same, especially through the scriptures at Mass, listening to Jesus. Sometimes a little phrase might sort of detonate in us personally. And we can embrace him in the Mass, in Holy Communion. So Mary's a wonderful model for that in the Mass. And also for that other beautiful aspect of the Mass, which is that every time we come to Mass, we are really with Jesus at the cross and at his resurrection. We share those moments with him. And Mary, she was there in the flesh. She was by the cross, looking at every detail of Jesus' love for us, and then with him in his resurrection. So she's a wonderful model for how we take part in the Mass in that way as well, by sharing in those moments of the death and resurrection of Christ. And so she's encouraged by this encounter with Jesus, but then she's given her mission. "Go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and said to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. Mary is the first one to be given that mission, to tell others about the resurrection. She's sometimes called the Apostle of the Apostles. So she went to the 11 apostles and announced to them the message they were going to carry all over the world. She's the Apostle of the Apostles. It's the most important message of Jesus' whole life, that he's risen. But what an unlikely witness. I don't know about you, but if I knew that someone had been possessed by 7 demons, I'd think twice before believing them if they told me someone had risen from the dead. She's not the most likely witness you'd choose. And also, she's a woman. And in that culture, women weren't seen in the same way as men in these matters. That they weren't respected in the same way as witnesses. And she's also from this very obscure town up north, Magdala. She was a Jew, but it's a pagan town in Galilee. So it's right on the edge of the Promised Land, right on the edge of the land of the Jews. So she's right on the edge of their culture. She's the least likely witness. And in fact, she's not believed by the apostles. She goes to the apostles and they don't believe her. And yet Jesus chose her. He didn't choose a man from Jerusalem. He chose her to bear this most important message. And I think that can encourage us, because he chooses us. Even if we don't think we're very good at sharing the gospel, or we're, if only I was this, if only I was that. He chooses us. He chooses each one of us by our baptism to share that amazing message of the resurrection. No matter who we are, he chooses us and he trusts us. He trusts each one of us with that message. We don't need to be afraid. And that message is that he is going to Galilee. It doesn't come out in this passage, but in the other Gospels, he says again and again, tell my brothers to go to Galilee, they will find me there. Go to Galilee. Again, going to this rather obscure area up north. Apologies to any northerners here. But north of Israel, away from Jerusalem, away from the capital. You'd think Jesus might have said, go to Rome, the heart of the empire. Go to one of the big Greek cities. But no, go to Galilee. You'll find me in Galilee. Because that's where they were all from. All the apostles were from Galilee. Mary was from Galilee. Jesus was from Galilee. Jesus is saying, go home. He's saying, you'll find me at home. You'll find me in your ordinary life. You don't need to travel to some far distant country. You'll find me at home in your ordinary life, among your relatives and friends. Go home. That's where the risen Christ goes. And so too for us. We don't need to go on a long journey to spread the gospel. We go home to our family, to our friends, to our colleagues. That's where the risen Christ goes. And that's the message that Mary gives. And her message is very simple. She goes to the disciples and she says, I have seen the Lord. I've seen the Lord. And that's the message, that's the best message we can ever give anyone. Of course, we need to know our faith very well so that we can answer their questions. But the first thing is that we share our personal experience of Jesus with others. I've seen the Lord. I've experienced the risen Jesus in my life. He is alive. And I've felt that in my life. I have seen the Lord. We can give testimony to how we've seen the Lord in our own lives. That's the greatest way we can share our faith with others. I have seen the Lord. And this great mission that Mary is given, we're reminded of that mission at the end of every Mass. Even the word Mass is connected to it. The word Mass comes from the Latin phrase which is said at the end of every Mass, ite missa est. Go, it has been sent, literally. Although we translate it in different ways, we say, go forth, the Mass is ended. Go and announce the gospel of the Lord. Go, you're being sent, we're being sent. The Mass means sent. At the end of every Mass, we are sent to go and share that message, weak and imperfect as we are, back in our homes, in our workplaces. I have seen the Lord. And Mary is the wonderful model of that. And so Mary, she keeps close to Jesus from that very moment when he healed her of her demons, through his cross and resurrection. She listens to him call her by name, which brings her to faith, and she responds to his mission. No doubt strengthened by the Eucharist, strengthened by that embrace of Jesus in the Eucharist, and also strengthened by another Mary. That we hear that by the cross she was standing with Mary, the mother of Jesus. So Mary Magdalene also helps us keep close to her namesake, our mother. We can finish with a prayer, and then there's a few short notices and then more food. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.